Hello and welcome to the next episode of the Page One podcast. I'm Tarek.
I'm Marco.
And you've just heard the advert for Page One. We're really excited because it's just launched, Kickstarter. It's a notebook to help you write. It's broken down into sections, and as writers ourselves, we're really excited. I genuinely think it will help you improve your writing. So if you're at all interested, check it out. All the information's in the bio. Tell your friends, buy one for your friends, buy one for yourself, buy one for your cat. Buy one for everybody. It's fantastic.
Yeah, the risk of flogging the cat. It is a project that we've designed because we are writers. We love writing, and we thought it was something that would help us, and we really hope it will help you. So please do check it out. But anyway, to get on with the podcast, this week we're speaking to a screenwriter, Sergio Casci. He's the screenwriter of films such as The Collar and the soon-to-be-released The Lodge, which is a horror film which has been getting rave reviews at Sundance and various other festivals. We speak to Sergio about that in the podcast. We also speak to him about his earlier work, which includes a film that my uncle actually featured in. Sergio was unaware of that at the time, but we discussed that as well. But anyway, it was an enjoyable chat we had with Sergio. It was over Skype, so the audio sometimes isn't as good as it could be, but we've cleaned it up as much as possible and hope you enjoy listening. We'll be back at the end of the podcast, but in the meantime, let's hear what Sergio had to say. What we're just going to do today is go through... I sort of sent you a very basic agenda last night.
Yeah, I looked through that and that was very useful.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I got my notes with all the names. I forget who directed everything I ever wrote. I forget who starred in it. I forget when it was made. I sometimes forget the titles of the films. It's true. Because once it's gone, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine, we'll get onto this in the main thing, but I imagine that you'll write something and then it'll be a while before it actually turns into something. You've moved on by that stage almost.
Years and years. But I've also got a really bad memory as well. Which is why sometimes my lead character changes name halfway through the film. And producers think it's because I'm being terribly postmodern. In fact, it's not. It's just because, I forgot what name I'd given them and I just
decided another one was better. So, it's a very big question, but how did you get started in screenwriting?
Well, when I was wee, I wanted to be a writer, but nobody around me was a writer. We didn't know any writers. I'd never met one. So the idea of doing it as a job seemed a wee bit pie in the sky. But I also had the notion to be a journalist. I had quite a romantic idea about being a reporter, probably from having seen All the President's Men. So after I left uni, I did psychology at university. And after I left, I volunteered in a local community newspaper. And that led to a few other things. And eventually I ended up at the BBC doing journalism. I was a journalist at BBC Scotland. And while I was there, I met a fantastic director called Don Coots, great Scottish director. And he and I worked on a documentary about Scots-Italians. Mm-hmm. It was called Pesce Patate, which is about the Fish and Chip Festival in Badga in Tuscany, which you'll know all about.
Yeah, I have to declare an interest because my uncle's actually in that film, the documentary.
Is he? Which one's he? What does he say?
Is Loreno not in it?
Loreno Rinaldi?
Yeah.
Is your uncle?
Is my uncle, yeah.
He's not.
He is.
Oh, I should have known by the good looks and the sparkling intelligence. Loreno's your uncle. Loreno made that film. He was so good in it. Yeah. So funny and affectionate and articulate, and it was a lovely experience because we went over to Barga, Don Coots and I, and the crew, and we spent a week or two there making this documentary, which went out to the BBC, and we got on really well, Don and I, and it turned out that he wanted to write a feature. He wanted to direct a feature film, and I wanted to write a feature film. So we got together, and I wrote my first feature-length script, and it was called Out of Season, and it was a sort of romantic comedy come political thriller come crime caper, which maybe tells you one of the reasons why it was never made. I managed to squeeze about 17 different genres into one 90-minute film. We both loved it. We thought it was really good, but we couldn't get any dosh for it. And so then we decided to be a wee bit less ambitious and go to do a short film. So we made 3 short films, and they all went really well. One was called Dead Sea Reels, which starred the actor Ian Bannon, the fabulous Scottish actor Ian Bannon, playing a priest, a sort of mysterious priest. And then we made a comedy called St. Anthony's Day Off, which went back to the whole Scots-Italian thing. It was a bunch of Scots-Italians watching the 1994 World Cup. Only in our version, Roberto Baggio scores his penalty and Italy beat Brazil.
Yeah, I remember. I've seen that. I remember seeing that. In fact, did Giancarlo? There's a lot of family interest here. Did my cousin not record commentary for that, for the made-up penalty scoring?
Was it him that did that?
I think it was. Yeah, I think it was.
I did not know that because I know him. I didn't know. Did he do that? That was amazing, bro. Anyway, it was a great film, especially because we managed to change the result.
Exactly, yeah.
It was funny though, because, for those who don't remember or know about football, the 1994 World Cup was, of course, won by Brazil on penalties against Italy. And in my wee film, we turned it around and Italy won. And the next day, my mum, who was a teacher at the time, she went into the staff room and she overheard a couple of people arguing. And one of them was saying, Italy won. I saw it on TV last night. Baggio scored. And the other guy saying, look. So it caused a wee bit strife.
You were doing the Donald Trump thing before Donald Trump.
Make
your own news.
Fake news. You don't like the world? Change it. So that was, and then we made another film called Rose, which was a great wee film, very scary wee film. And it was Rose, in fact, that inspired the later feature film, The Caller. Because it was some idea. And then I went on to do a bit of TV and I did this and that, and we can talk about specific things as and when you want.
So was it through Dawn that you were, because I suppose what people might want to know is, you've written a script, how did you get it in front of the right people to say, let's make this, let's show this on TV?
Well, I was extremely lucky because I was in the BBC already. So you're a massive broadcasting organisation and you're meeting people and you're seeing people and you're in contact with people who are doing lots of things. In this case, it was a documentary, but the BBC also makes drama. So I don't think the fact that I worked at the BBC gave me a particular in the sense that if the screenplay was mince, they'd have said it was mince. But it meant it was quite easy for me to make an appointment to see somebody and that kind of thing. And it also meant that I had contacts with people who, had I been working in a chip shop, I wouldn't have necessarily got. So I was very fortunate. I was very lucky to be there at the time. And that was my first foot through the door.
And so was American Cousins your first full length?
American Cousins was my first full-length one. And what happened there was, because of the whole Scots-Italian thing and because my heritage was very interesting to me, I examined it in lots of ways in my fiction. I had this idea of an Italian family which immigrates. Half of them go to New Jersey and they end up as gangsters. And the other half go to Glasgow and end up frying fish, which I know is a terrible stereotype. But, I felt that as a Scots-Italian, I was allowed to play with stereotypes about my own kind. And it was tremendous fun. It was tremendous fun making it. And we had what's his name? Vincent Pastore from The Sopranos in it. Big Pussy.
Yep.
And it was funny because this is around 2000 or so. 1999 I probably started it. Probably even before that. But when it came out, the internet, to me at least, was quite a new thing. I didn't know its evil ways, and I was in a wee office. I'd got myself I'd left the BBC at this point, and I got myself a wee office in town, and I wanted to put pictures of all the actors up on the wall. You see, and so I had my new internet machine, and I typed in. I couldn't remember his name. I couldn't remember Vincent Pastore's name, so I typed in Big Pussy, and that was my first introduction to the ways of the internet.
But you didn't print out the picture.
I printed out a picture of Vincent Pastore. The other ones are now on a thumb drive.
So is that something that's quite important to you then, writing what you know, that kind of area?
No, I think that's mince. Write what you know. I don't think you should write what you know. I think you should write what you care about. I think you should write what interests you. Because if you're going to be writing a screenplay, it could take you months, definitely years possibly, and then before it ever gets made, if it gets made, it could be several years. So if you're writing something just because you know about it, you might be bored to death by it at that point. If you write about something which interests you, which you're passionate about, you're much more likely to write something that interests other people as well, and you're much more likely to stick to it. So, if you're passionate about extraterrestrial aliens, how many people know about extraterrestrial aliens? They don't. How many people know about tropical fish, and but Finding Nemo was a great hit. So writing what you know is, there's an element of truth to that, but it's not the be all and end all. I think far more important is write what you care about, write what interests you, write what you're passionate about, because then you'll convey that and you'll stick with it. But I think passion for something, a genuine passion for something, translates. So I'm not interested in French children's choirs, but it was a great film of a French children's choir. And because the filmmakers were interested and passionate about it, that translated. I'm not particularly interested in things in chess, but there's tremendous films about chess players which grip you and pull you in, because you piggyback the authors, the writers, directors, passion for it. So I think write what you're interested in is much more useful. It was for me than write what you know. I think write what you know can mislead people, and you get an awful lot of films about students living in a shared flat.
or struggling writers or something.
Struggling writers are brilliant. Struggling writers, or also you get an awful, because you do a lot of scripts, and you do a lot of scripts about people who've always got a really pithy and witty thing to say to obnoxious people. You realise that the writer has just gone through writing all those things that they wish they'd said to folk over the years.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
I've done that myself, so hands up.
And with American Cousins being a feature, what was the process? So you wrote the script. How did that end up getting made? What was the process that you went through there?
So Don Coots and I and the producer Margaret Matheson, once we were happy with the script, she started shopping it around, and months and months and months passed, and nothing happened. And I later found out that she was the following day she was going to phone me and say, "Listen, we've done our best. I think we're going to have to drop it, and move on to something else." But that day, a company in London, they had this plan, whereby they would make something like 6 films every year at a certain budget, quite low budget, and 6 or 7. And one of their projects had just collapsed, and so they needed a 7th or a 6th to make up the numbers. And one of them turned around and said, "Right, quick, read a script. Has anybody read anything good?" And somebody had American Cousins in front of them and said, "I've just read this. It's really good." And they said, "Right, fine, we're making it." And they phoned her, and literally the day before she was about to say to me, "Listen, we're giving up," they phoned her and said, "We want your script after all." And she got in touch with me and said, they want it. So that was, again, it was luck. It was pure luck. The one piece of advice, though, I think it is luck. You can't get by without some luck. But it's like throwing darts at a dartboard. If you throw one dart, the chance of getting a bullseye are quite, well, depending who you are, but they're quite low. Yeah. If you throw 20 or 30 or 40, the chances go up exponentially. And so for every successful thing that you have, for every piece of luck, there's maybe 5, 10, 15 which, go in the bin. So, but there is luck involved. You have to have a wee bit. And
did you, I suppose, staying on that, did you have other things before American Cousins in terms of features that you'd written and just didn't, either you weren't happy with them or they didn't go anywhere?
In terms of features, I've been very lucky. I don't know what the hit rate usually is for features, but my hit rate has been really quite good. So the only one that I'd written and completed before that was Out of Season, which was my romantic comedy, political thriller, crime caper. Yeah. And then American Cousins was the first one that I'd written after that.
Yeah, so that is. I don't want to say it's lucky. That sounds bad, but it is a very very good.
It was absolutely lucky. Absolutely.
And did you get to, I suppose the other side of it is, once you've got your script picked up, which is awesome, and it's getting made into this film, were you on set? Did you go to the set? What was your involvement once it actually starts shooting?
My experience as a writer is that your involvement once it starts shooting is very, very negligible, really negligible. In a sense, as a writer, you don't have a role on set. Phil, somebody once said to me that a film crew is like perfectly benign fascism, because you have the director who is all powerful, and then everybody beneath the director knows their place exquisitely. There's so many gradations, and you always know who's in power at which point doing what, and it has to be thus on a film set. Yeah. The writer is out with that power structure, because you're not involved in the actual making of the film, and yet you wrote the film, and people don't quite know how to treat you. Should they ignore you? Should they be polite and different? And I think, in a sense, it's easier if you just don't go there, if you just stay away. I mean, personally, I think they should have the right there at all times, asking us our opinion about everything and obeying it to the letter. But that's maybe just me.
Yeah.
I understand why it doesn't happen that way. Why the writer doesn't have a role on set. Don was with American Cousins. He was extremely open about asking for input and so on. But he was very much the boss.
You've not had that experience, I suppose, or maybe you have, but you hear about writers that will write a script, it gets sent, it even gets put into production, but then they're actually sort of rewriting it on the day of shooting and stuff like that. They're rewriting a scene, refixing a scene. You've not had that sort of involvement.
I did have that experience, and there were certain production things whereby they needed me to write something quite quickly. I remember one particular instance was they needed we wanted a sort of moment of, or Don wanted a moment of beauty. This is one of his things. He's a fabulous director, and he says every film, no matter how grim or funny or whatever genre, it needs to have at least one moment of beauty. And he wanted to have a scene in Loch Lomond.
Yeah.
So they decided that they'd have two. What they call when you go sailing out and what's it called?
Like a yacht.
No. You stand on a board and there's a big.
A kite surfing.
Windsurfing. No, just windsurfing.
Yeah,
windsurfing.
You can tell we're all sportsmen.
So they wanted a couple of windsurfers, and Don said, "Well, let's get Serge and Helen. Helen's my wife. Let's get Serge and Helen. They'll do it. They're cheap." So we ended up in January. So the first thing I had to do was I had to write a scene involving two windsurfers on Loch Lomond. And I wrote it, it was like, I get it done for tomorrow kind of thing. Yeah. And then we had to ship out to Loch Lomond and film it. And it was freezing. It was the 6th of January. And Helen had this big windsuit, or, the wetsuit thing covering it. I only had trousers. I had to be naked from the waist up.
Wait, were you playing the windsurfers?
Yes. I was an extra. In fact, I was more than an extra. I got a credit at the end as Sergio Casci, stout windsurfer. And Helen was svelte windsurfer. But I got my own back on Don because Margaret then phoned me again a while later, said, we need another quick scene, just to put in the middle or something. And she said, we need the baddies to maybe beat up a security guard. And so I said, okay. So I wrote a scene in which the baddies beat up a security guard, tie him to a toilet, strip him naked, and tie him to a filthy toilet. And I said, oh, and by the way, see, writing this, I kind of had Don in my head the whole time. And so they did. They stripped him naked and tied him to a toilet and filmed it. Unfortunately, it didn't make the final cut of the film.
Surprising, because he probably edited it.
That's exactly what happened. That's the power of being a director. But at least you get tied naked to a toilet. It's not often you get them to do that to your director.
and then after that, it went on to have some success, didn't it? It won the BAFTA, I think.
It won a heck of a lot of awards. It didn't win. I was nominated for a BAFTA. I was nominated for a BAFTA and I didn't win, which is a horrible feeling no matter what anybody tells you. And it was funny though, because we went down to London, Helen and I, and we were dressed up. She had a lovely dress. I had, the bow tie and everything. And just as they're, and you're surrounded by, because it's the proper BAFTAs and everything.
Yeah.
You've got Hollywood stars sitting in front of you and behind you and to the side of you. And when it came to saying, who the winner was, they had a camera on me and a camera on the other three people. They had a camera on me and a couple of people next to me, including my wife. Mm-hmm. And when they announced that somebody else had won, I, as a good broadcaster, smiled and clapped. But Helen, who didn't realise the camera was on us, mouthed an Anglo-Saxon word, broadcast to the nation. So I'd love to find that piece of thought.
Because I always kind of wondered how much of a surprise it actually was on the night, or if people knew in advance, or if it was just you found out with a camera in your face. You absolutely don't know in advance. And I'll tell you something that's absolutely genuine. When they announced that I hadn't won, the sense of relief was overwhelming. Because all they had been thinking about was having to walk up on stage and make a speech. And I mean, I'd written down a few notes, but I couldn't, I tried reading them. I couldn't remember them. I was
I was dreading the idea of having to go up on the stage. So when they announced that I hadn't won, my first reaction was relief. Bitterness then crept in quickly. Bitterness, resentment, all manner of negative emotions. But at that moment, it was, whew.
Can you remember what beat you?
I'll tell you what. I was up against because it was the BAFTA for Best Newcomer.
Right.
It's Best New because it was my first feature film. I was up against the Girl with the Pearl Earring and another, I think, really big film, and then a lesser known film. I can't remember the way. I could find out. I could Google it. But I thought the Girl with the Pearl Earring would win, and then the other one won. By that point, it doesn't matter because the bitterness is set in.
Yes, it doesn't matter what it is.
Go home and I was going to say kick the cat, but you better not.
And then, so after American Cousins, did you try and stay in features? Or obviously you've done some TV work as well. So what was the?
Well, it's just a case of making a living.
Yeah.
The thing about America, if you get a feature film made, you get a nice dollop of money, but you've maybe spent 4, 5, 6 years writing that feature film, so it's not a living. But luckily, just after I left the BBC to go as a full-time writer, River City started up. Mm-hmm. I went along there and I got a job, still freelance, but I was writing regularly for River City for several years. So I always had other projects going, like I would be working on a movie or a couple of movie ideas and maybe a couple of children's ideas. But River City kept me going for a while. After I left the BBC. So
and is River City is something, a program like River City is presumably not the idea of an American writer's room as such, but you won't be structuring the whole thing yourself, presumably.
No, that's right. What would happen is you'd all get together, a bunch of writers, maybe a dozen writers, and you would there would be a sort of broad conversation about where the storylines were going, and then you would be assigned a particular story document, which is maybe even just a page and a half, saying, this is where you start, this is where you start the episode, this is where you finish the episode, this is what has to happen in the middle. And then, how you get there is a little bit up to you. But in fact, it's not up to you at all, because then you do a second draft and they tell you to change it, and then you do a third draft, change it, then you do a fourth draft and they tell you to change it, and then you might even do a fifth draft and they say you liked it better the first time. There's an awful lot of backwards and forwards, but when you've got a massive show like that with so many different actors and so many different story strands, and they're planning maybe months ahead, something like if an actor falls ill, or if you might have to then say, right, go back 7 episodes and change such and such because we can't have him or her doing such and such. So it's a big technical job, and you have to be able to spin on a dime, as they say, and just accept that your wonderful storyline isn't going anywhere because the actor's pregnant, and therefore you have to go back and change it, and you just do it.
And is that sort of writing still as enjoyable as writing your own stuff, or does it feel more like a job, I suppose?
It's totally different. I find that sometimes the first draft can feel like your own stuff because you're getting all your original thoughts and ideas, and but by the time you come to the fourth or fifth draft, it can be a little bit soul crushing. It's a very different. You're using different muscles when you're writing for soap than when you're writing your own stuff or writing for feature films, and you can get a real craftsperson's satisfaction out of doing that. You can get real thrill when something works, but it can be incredibly frustrating, especially when you have to make changes, not for artistic reasons, but for technical reasons, and you see it's not a case of strangling your darlings; it's a case of somebody taking your darlings up the alley and putting them to death. It's a different kind of feeling altogether.
Is there a strange sort of freedom to that, though, in the sense that you don't need to worry about coming up with the idea, you don't need to worry about the place you're going to set it in. You've got all the places in play, and you're just having to move them around a little bit. Yes, that's absolutely right, and I quite enjoyed it because one of the things I like best is dialogue. I enjoy writing dialogue, and if you've got the rough story structure and you know where you have to start and where you have to end, that does mean okay, I'll just concentrate on the fun bits, which are making people say funny, clever, sad, angry things, and also there's a real satisfaction if the producer wants something to happen. If you can make it happen in a particularly clever or interesting way, you get a thrill out of that, And the other thing is, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people are watching it.
any small fame I have ever had has come basically from writing River City, you know? Not from, you make a feature film, it's seen by very few people unless it's Tom Cruise. You write River City, the whole street knows the next day what you did to, wee Bob or...
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I suppose the other question that people listening might be interested in is how did you get the River City job? How do you pick up this sort of ongoing work as a writer to make a living while you're doing your feature films on the side, sort of a thing?
You've got to remember that the environment, we're talking about 20 years ago when this happened, and the environment today is very different in lots of different ways. So the way I got involved was I'd already written my short films, and they'd done quite well, and they'd won a few awards, and so I was known as a writer who had done some nice work, and I was invited along to have a chat with I can't remember if he was the executive producer or something like that. Very nice chap, and we talked, and he said, "Tell me your thoughts about writing continuing drama." That's the fancy name. You're not allowed to call it soap when you're talking about
okay.
Continuing drama, but among us, we'll call it soap. And I remember, he liked one thing which I said, which was, I said that when you're writing a story, the day-to-day story, everything should be kept as small as possible, because in a soap, when you're very intimate with people and you're very involved in their lives, somebody not getting a job can be devastating, and it can be a fantastic piece of drama. And the problem starts when you have this sort of the stakes are getting, a season after season and episode after episode, and they're running out of storylines. People start building the drama to the extent that instead of somebody losing a job, it's somebody losing a leg, or it's somebody getting run over, or somebody getting murdered. And there's this tendency in all soaps, I think, to inflate, it's the sort of inflation of drama. And so by the end, aliens are invading and nuclear bombs are blowing up Shootenge. Well, that didn't happen to River City because they knew that they had to keep it small. And if you keep it small, that means that when you do go big, say for the Christmas special, and somebody does die or somebody does have an affair, it really affects the audience. And then you can quite naturally go back to normal life for the next season kind of thing. But if you go in too big and too hard, too often, you have this inflation and it ends up becoming absurd. I mean, there's something, was it Dallas or Dynasty where actually aliens did invade?
Yeah, I think it was Dynasty, in fact. I think that's right. And Dallas had the whole...
JR in the shower.
Bobby Ewing.
Bobby in the shower.
Bobby Ewing.
Bobby. And anyway, we discussed this, and to come back to the point about how I got the gig, I remember using an analogy, and he really liked it. The producer chap really liked it. And it was an analogy with newspapers, which is like, you've got a paper like the Times, with something really dramatic happens, like the government falls. What size type do you use for the headline? Well, you don't use the biggest type, because although the government may have fallen, we've not gone to war, because if the next day we go to war, what size type do you use for that? And if we're, so you have to always remember that the bigger once you go big, it's very hard to go back. So it's on an intimate human level, and you can really exploit the drama. And he liked me saying that, and he thought I had the right attitude. So he said, "Well, we'll give you a script and see how you do." So I wrote it. They liked it, and then for a few years after that, I was a regular.
And then the next feature film, The Caller. Was that or did you do anything in between?
No. So I had American Cousins, and then I did a feature film called Man Dancing with another fantastic Scottish director, Norman Stone, based on a story that he had written. It was a sort of modern day Easter tale set in, a Glasgow scheme. It was a sort of crime drama kind of thing, which again was really good fun to do. Working with Norman Stone was brilliant. I've been very, very lucky with the directors I've worked with, Scottish ones, particularly Don Coots, Norman Stone. They're good fun to work with. They're clever people. They're very good at the job, and they're nice guys. And so I've always really enjoyed the process of working with them.
Just jumping in there, I suppose, is there that sort of collaborative thing with the director when you actually discuss the story and maybe change it after discussing it with them and stuff like that?
Absolutely. I mean, it depends on the director, and it depends who the director is. So with Don and Norman Stone, they were both Scotland-based. And so we met up regularly and so on. But if you're working with somebody maybe who works in London or who works in New York or who works whatever, and you can't get together that often, it becomes less collaborative just because you can't get together all that often to do it. And different directors like to work in different ways. Some directors like to get the script, talk to you about it, and then go off and do their thing. And that's fine as well, because they have to bring their own aesthetic to it and their own, skills.
And then is your true interest a kind of horror genre? Is that what you're really interested in? Because both The Lodge and The Caller were both that kind of genre.
I'm funny because I've got two separate sort of strings to my bow. One is horror, which I really enjoy, horror, psychological thrillers, that kind of thing. And the other is children's, because I've got a film coming out this year called Princess Emmy and Her Horses, which is a movie about a wee princess who can talk to horses, and it's based on a lovely set of books in Germany. Prinzessin Emmy und ihre Pferde.
Very good German.
Prinzessin Emmy und ihre Pferde. Is that right? Do you know German?
Well, it sounded convincing to me.
It does sound, yeah. Just going to sound but I do a lot, in Katie Morag as well. Yeah. So I always think it's kind of weird when if I look at myself on IMDb, which occasionally I do, if you look at yourself on IMDb and I see that half of them are, these horrible horror films, and the other half are really nice films about, children skipping gaily through the valley, it's a weird split. But those are my two professional interests. So children's TV, drama, film, and on the other side, horror and psychological thrillers.
And with The Caller, how did that come about? Was that your first horror script that was going for?
That was my first horror feature because I'd done Rose, which was a short, and then the central conceit in Rose is that one day there's this young woman and her phone rings and she picks it up and it's a wrong number, but it turns out that the person is phoning from 30 years ago. And I remember being intrigued by that as an idea. Imagine if that happened in real life. Uh-huh. And so I'd written a short film based on that conceit. But I always thought there was more to it. I always thought I could stretch it out to a feature. And years and years and years passed. But eventually, I got a screenplay together, and it got picked up. It happened quite. Once it started, it happened quite quickly. It was originally meant to be set in Glasgow, in fact, and nobody was interested. And then I did a find and replace, and I changed Glasgow to New York. Suddenly, and changed a few words, rubbish to garbage and that kind of thing. Yeah. And then people were interested when I changed it all to New York. And then they decided to send the director over to Puerto Rico to see if San Juan could stand in for New York. Right. And he went and he said, well, yeah, it could stand in for New York, but why bother? Because, why not just set it in San Juan? There's a very interesting cultural mix in Puerto Rico because it's American without being American. It's a strange relationship with the USA, mm-hmm. and parts of it are very, very American, and other parts are very sort of Latin American, and it's got religious undercurrents. There's a religious movement called, I think, Santeria, which is a mixture of sort of Catholic and African and Native American traditions. And it's a spooky kind of vibe. Mm-hmm. And there's also an awful lot of white American Anglo-Saxon types. And I wanted my lead to be a sort of Anglo-Saxon type. That was the way I pictured her. But there's like a big naval base. And so there's an awful lot of these people there. And you had a strange cultural mix as well, which added a lot to the texture of the film. Yeah. And so we ended up shooting it in Puerto Rico.
Wow. And then, so you'd written the script for The Caller, and how was it that you then got that out there? Did
you have to get an agent, or?
Yeah.
Oh, but I'd had an agent right from more or less, not right from the start, but pretty soon after writing the original short film Rose. I was at the BBC and I was looking for an agent. I'd been turned down by a few, and I spoke to a producer there who said that she knew this chap Nigel Britton, who was interested in looking at Scottish writers, and did I have anything I could show him? And I think it was Rose that I sent him, and he got back to me and he said he really liked it. Could we meet? And we're talking 25 years ago, and he was my first agent, and I'm still with him today.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Brilliant.
So again, you were talking 25 years ago. I don't know how much harder it is to get an agent nowadays, because I've never, since getting Nigel as my agent. I've always been really happy with him, so I've never looked for another one. So I find it hard to give advice to young writers because, I'm talking about 1996, 1997. Yeah. Who knows what the climate's like now? And
The Collar, it did quite well. Is that fair to say? But it didn't seem to quite land as big as it could have done.
No, it didn't. It didn't make me rich and famous. Well, nothing's made me rich and famous yet. It got some. It's funny. I think among horror fans, it was quite liked. Mm-hmm. People thought it was doing something different. It was a wee bit. We were trying to go for an intelligent storyline and so on. Sometimes, you wonder why some things do really well and other things just do okay. And again, it's a matter of luck. I know that one thing that really bugged me was a film had come out not that long before The Collar, and I'm trying to remember what it was called. I can't, but it used a similar idea. It was that somebody touched via radio
frequency.
Dennis
Quaid movie, yeah.
So Dennis Quaid movie Frequency, in which his father contacts him through this his father's dead, I think, and contacts him from 20 years ago through these headphones.
Right.
And I remember people saying that I would ripped it off. I hadn't ripped it off because Rose, which was the original, had been written 10, 15 years before Frequency. Yeah. I'm not claiming that Frequency ripped me off. I'm not saying that at all, Your Honour. No, obviously they had. It's a short film, but I think some people thought we'd ripped them off and we hadn't.
Yeah.
We were.
Yeah. There is that strange thing in certainly Hollywood anyway, where there's two ideas seem to get made at the same time of completely randomness, and there's no connection really. But
there's something in the air, there's something in the water, there's something in. I'm sure actually, if you got a social anthropologist to examine, they would find what the original source was for both ideas. But it can be an anniversary, it can be a news item, and then you forget what it was that inspired. All you know is that 5 years later, somebody's making the same bloody movie as you are.
Yeah.
And I think 99 times out of 100 is purely coincidence. Yeah. I believe that things are nicked far less often than people think they are nicked. I think it is a case of people coming in with the same idea at the same time.
So you'd written the script for The Collar, and when you handed it in and stuff, was there much change? Did the studio say we want this change, want that change, or were they quite happy with it? What was the kind of back and forth process?
I went down to London and met director Matthew Parkhill, who had he'd made I think this was his second movie, and yet the film he'd made had done really well. It was really cool. He's got a great eye, and we had a chat through it, and he wanted a few changes. So we just sat in his room for a day and went through it and made a bunch of changes. And then I gave it to him for a director's pass because he wanted to write in some of the changes that came about through setting it in Puerto Rico. So there's a scene, for example, in a street festival, and there were various visual things that he wanted to put in. So he did that, gave it back to me, and we to and fro'd a wee bit. But when it came to the actual film being shot, it stayed remarkably close to the original script. A few changes inevitably, but it stayed remarkably close.
And then, staying on the horror theme, The Lodge has just been, or has been shown at festivals and stuff, and seems to be getting pretty rave reviews at the moment. And
it's funny though, maybe it's a Scottish thing, that it's a lot easier to cope with failure than it is with success. Because some of the reviews have been amazing. I mean, really amazing, and I find myself slightly embarrassed by it. You can deal with people slagging you off. You're used to that. Yeah. But when people start saying you're the best thing since sliced bread, you start saying, "No, I'm not." It's like you feel like you're being set up for a fall. So I'm kind of trying to not be, too worked up about the fact that the response has been absolutely amazing. Mm-hmm. Some of the comments from people who saw it were just, it's the kind of review I would write for my own film if I knew it was me writing it.
Yeah.
If I got to write that, if you get to write your own, your own reference.
Yeah, exactly.
Fine. It's honestly just been so fantastic. So I'm chuffed. But fingers crossed. Let's wait and see. It's not been released to the public yet. But if the response from the public is as good as the response from the overwhelming number of critics, then I'll be really, really, really chuffed.
And has it got a distributor and a release date or anything? Yeah,
it's got a distributor in the States, and they're looking to. I think they're in talks just now about other territories as well.
Brilliant,
fantastic. Is it quite odd when you write a film and you watch the scene played out by two people and you have it in your head one way and then you're watching it? Do you ever think that's not how that line's meant to be said, or you've ruined the pacing or something?
Absolutely. From the very first thing I ever made, it was talking about Dead Sea Reels. It had Ian Bannon, who is a fantastic Oscar-nominated actor, and he was perfect in it. But there was a single word he had to say. And what it was there's the father of a wee girl whose daughter has died and is depressed. And Ian Bannon turns up as this mysterious priest. And the dad has to say, blah, 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 old Jesuit trick, ? And the other guy says, and Ian Bannon said, Dominican. And it was the way he said Dominican. I thought he was saying Dominican. No, it wasn't. It was the guy who was saying old Jesuit trick. It was supposed to be a question. Old Jesuit trick? ?
Right.
And instead he said old Jesuit trick, as if he knew. And we're talking about something that's so tiny. I can't even remember now which way round it was. But I remember at the time thinking, no, it's the whole meaning of the entire. Of course, nobody watching even noticed or cared. But I think as the writer, you are exquisitely aware of every little change. So I find now, and I try and do this as a matter of policy, that whenever something has been shot and edited and I'm seeing it for the first time I want to see it purely by myself, just so I can sit through it, tearing my hair out. Because you cannot tell what you feel about something you've written first time you watch it, because all you're paying attention to is the changes. You ignore everything else. Then you put it to one, then you go back a couple of hours later, the next day, and you watch it again, and you think, wow, they not only have they delivered everything that was in the screenplay, they've improved it because they've brought this and they've brought this sensibility and they've brought this aesthetic and they've brought this angle. And so usually, luckily, I find that the second time I watch something that somebody else has directed and, brought their own thing to, I love it. But the first time, I just need to be alone so I can punch the walls and say, you killed my babies!
Exactly. And looking at the process of actually writing a script, do you sort of bash out a first draft, leave it for a bit, go back to it, or do you sort of read each scene the next day and try and tinker with it then?
My process of writing has changed an awful lot since I started. And when I started writing, I wasn't trained in any way. I read a couple of books, but there was no class. There were far less in those days anyway. There weren't easily accessible classes or such. And when I started writing, I used to spend a lot of time in front of the laptop or in front of the computer or in front of the typewriter when I started, just staring at the blank page. And nowadays, I do far less of that. Nowadays, there's a saying which I think is brilliant, which is your first thought isn't always inspiration. Sometimes it's just your first thought. Mm-hmm. And I really hold by that. I find that nowadays I hold off before starting to write the screenplay proper. I'll happily wait weeks and months just sitting about, walking around, thinking of things, writing down ideas, because I know that if I give it a little bit of time, I can improve what I've got. So whereas in the old days, I might end up writing 6 drafts of something and improving it with each draft, now I like to try and enter the process when I've already developed it much more in my own head. Mm-hmm. So I can't attach enough importance to just daydreaming as a writer, just sitting about daydreaming, thinking about things, because that's where your ideas come from. There's a famous story of the Hollywood mogul standing outside a writer's room and being angry because he couldn't hear the typewriter clicking. Mm-hmm. So he thought they weren't working. And I think as somebody from my background, the idea that you weren't making a noise, you weren't actually typing, meant you weren't working. But of course you're not. The typing up bit is the easy bit. It's the coming up with the ideas and then coming up with a better one and then coming up with an even better one. And that's thinking, that's just sitting quietly or walking through the park.
Yeah, totally. Or noting it down in a good notebook, perhaps.
Or noting it down. If only, the thing I would really love, and the problem is that sometimes it would help if you had a notebook that sort of shaped and helped categorize your thoughts and just when you need it gave you a certain, nudge in the right direction. If such a thing had existed, I think it would be really useful. But
it's funny you should say that, Sergio.
Have you heard of such a thing?
I might be able to send you something.
And do you show it to anyone when it's a work in progress? Do you want to get kind of feedback, or do you like to just not show it until it's completely ready?
My wife's a novelist, and far more talented than me, and I use and exploit her to the max. And she's genuinely the best person to talk to, because, well, actually, she always says the same thing. I show her a screenplay, and she says, "You don't know the characters well enough." So I'll go away and rewrite it, and I'll show it to her, and she'll read it, and she'll say, "Yeah, you don't know the characters well enough." And so I'll go away and I'll rewrite it. And when she eventually stops saying, "You don't know the characters well enough," then it's ready to show. Because my problem is, and I think this is something that I am overcoming as a writer, but it was certainly a big issue with my early stuff. I sort of treated my characters as puppets who were to act out the story I had in my head, and you can write a pretty good show like that, but actually, if you know the characters, if the characters are actually driving the story authentically, and if you know their back, that just adds a certain richness and believability and authenticity, which elevates it. And I couldn't be bothered learning about my characters. I just wanted them to do what I told them to do. And sorry,
I was just going to say, I wonder if that's a difference in the form, isn't it? Because if you're writing a novel, you have to get inside the character's head more to advance the story. You can't just show I know they always say show not tell, but you have to spend more time with the characters perhaps than you do in a screenplay. You have to get it across very quickly what is happening.
Well, that's what I always thought. I always thought, well, I'm not inside the characters' heads. Why do I have to know, where they went to school if it's not relevant? But what I learned and what she taught me was that how the character behaves. It's that thing about, character determines action, action reveals character. If you want your character to do something, you have to think, why have they made that choice? Or you have to know why they've made that choice. And if there's an element of randomness, they're making the choice because it suits my plot, then the audience doesn't necessarily pick up on that directly. They don't think, that was a very unmotivated thing for that protagonist to do. They don't think that, but actually they come away with a feeling of, the film was okay, but it didn't really, it didn't punch them in the guts. If you want to punch somebody in the guts, then what happens has to be really motivated by the way a character is. And the more you do that, the better your work is. And I did learn that from her. She's been tremendously useful from that point of view. And living with a writer, man, it's the best thing, because writers have weird lives. That thing about lying on the couch for a couple of hours and RuPaul is on in the background. Do you know what I mean? And you're eating crisps at 2 p.m. Now, some people might not think that's work. In actual fact, that could be the most productive 2 hours of your day, because you're thinking, you're half watching RuPaul, but the other half is thinking about some plot or character point, and you're working through it semi-consciously, and you can solve a major problem in that 2 hours lying on the couch watching telly eating crisps. Some people wouldn't understand that, but because my wife's a writer, and because I've often found her lying on the couch eating crisps, watching and then rushing off to write a chapter. I understand her, she understands me.
Yeah.
Some people wouldn't understand.
No, absolutely, yeah.
But if you want to be a writer, marry a writer.
I suppose the one question I've got is, you've already said, you don't necessarily stand by the write what you know type thing. Is there any other rules that you do think are quite important for like a writer to follow?
Not only do I when I saw your question, I wrote a couple down.
Oh, fantastic.
I wrote a couple down. I may have already mentioned them all. Have you ever read a book called Save the Cat by Blake Snyder?
Yeah.
I remember reading that, and the sort of, to me, the central idea there, he gives an example of a film. Imagine a film which ends up in outer space with a sort of Star Wars Battlestar Galactica shootout that cost $5 million to film, right? So this is the film, but it starts off with our hero walking down the street, and he hears meow, meow, meow. And he looks up and there's a cat stuck in a tree. And he's late for work, and but you know what? He can't leave the wee kitty there. So he pulls off his jacket, climbs the tree, cuts himself, gets torn, grabs the cat, half falls down, saves it, and walks on his merry way. And the film is ready for the final cut, final edit, and they need to chop out 3 minutes. And there's only two places where they can chop it out. They can either chop out a 3-minute battle in space, which cost $5 million to film, or they can chop out the 3 minutes where he saves the cat, which cost £2.50 in a Kit Kat. And so it's almost inevitable that they're going to cut out the thing that was cheap and easy to film. And he says, Blake Snyder says, that's a disastrous thing to do, because the 3 minutes when he's climbing a tree and saving the cat establishes him as a character, draws the audience in, makes the audience empathise with him, root for him, care about him, so that when he's having the fight in space, you give a damn. If you don't have him saving the cat, if you drop that, it doesn't matter how many millions you spend in Battlestar Galactica up in the heavens, the audience won't care. And so that's a really important rule, which is that setting up your character, making your audience root for them, care about them, identify, engage with them, that's one of the single most important things you can do. And if you've got that right, if you've made them care about the audience, care about the protagonist in the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes, you've really taken a great step towards writing a compelling film. So Save the Cat, that's one of the lessons, I think. Another one was, I think I've mentioned them all. There was write what you know about versus write what you care about.
Yeah.
And the other one was, I mentioned it, sometimes your first idea is not inspiration, it's just your first idea. Mm-hmm. So if you follow those 3 rules, you'll write a fantastic movie.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
My daughter, it's funny actually, my daughter, when she was 5, she's more of a film buff than I've ever been. She understood film better than I did when she was 5. And she used to watch a lot of romantic comedies when she was a wee girl. And she had rules about what made a successful film, so much so that she wrote them down in her childish, handwriting and stuck to the TV. And all films had to have a wedding and a happy honeymoon, and the groom could not have a beard. And those were 3 rules. It had to be a romantic comedy with a wedding and with a leading man who didn't have a beard. Again, I think that is a recipe for success.
That's pre-hipster times, though. Beards are now essential.
It's true.
I
think actually it applies even more nowadays. Now that the hipsters have descended upon us.
And have you ever had any desire to sort of write anything other than screenplays? Have you ever thought, a novel might be something good to write?
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. Because seeing that my wife has, done so well as a novelist, and seeing all the adoration that novelists get. People love you if you're a novelist. Honestly, they treat you so well and so nicely. And see, when you're a screenwriter, I mean, unless you're like, William Goldman or somebody, but see, when you're a screenwriter, you're somewhere between the Office Junior and the used tea bags. You don't get much glory. The money can be really good. The money can be really good, and you can work with some brilliant people. But in terms of status and adoration, you don't get much. And so I always thought I'd love to write a novel. But whenever I've sat down to write a novel, I grind to a halt after about half a page. And I don't know why. When I'm screenwriting, I find it very easy, to either have my own voice or enter somebody else's head. It's never been a problem. But when I read books, I tend to read books which are very simply written. I don't like very dense prose. But when I sit down to write prose, which I've done a couple of times, I end up writing or trying to write like James Joyce. I mean, we're talking about somebody, I cannot read a page of James Joyce. I never mind understand it. It's not that I'm Joycean. It's that I've got this thing in my head that as a prose writer, you have to, every letter has to be beautifully crafted. There's a story about Joyce. Apparently one day he was lying in his room and his agent came by and said, "James, what's wrong?" And James said, "Today's been a disaster." He goes, "Why?" He goes, "How many words have you written?" He goes, 7. He goes, 7? That's quite good for you, James. He goes, "Yes, but what order? What order?" and that's it. So I grind to a halt when I try and write prose. I try and become this person who I'm not, this arty-farty person. Yeah. And I don't seem to be able to break through that. But one day, my dream is that I will write a best-selling novel and I will be treated with, glory.
And then Helen can adapt it into a screenplay.
Sorry?
You can swap roles. Helen could adapt it into a screenplay then.
She's written tons of screenplays. She's a better screenwriter than I am as well.
There you go.
Just generally all round. But I got her, so keep your hands off. I get to use all those brains for my... Oh yeah, I'm crawling along in her coattails shamelessly.
So you've got Princess Emmy I won't try and say it in German coming out. What else is in the pipeline?
In the pipeline, I've got Princess Emmy. I'm working on a new a sort of ghost story set during World War II. In fact, set in the internment camps on the Isle of Man.
Right.
You know, the Germans, Italians, various other people were interned in the Isle of Man during World War II. And I've had this idea for a ghost story, which it's one of those ideas I've been churning around in my head literally for 15 years. But I've just now, I think, finally semi-cracked it. So I'm working on that as my next horror film. And I've got a idea for a children's series that I'm working on as well. So really busy at the moment, yeah. Brilliant. And I've got a UFO film. I've written a screenplay about a UFO incident that happened in the 80s. I'm doing that with Scottish producer Peter Braun.
Okay.
Peter Roy. And so that's also bubbling away under the surface at the moment. So is
that horror tinged as well, or is it more sci-fi?
It's actually based on a true story. So
okay.
and we've stuck to the facts more or less.
Okay.
So it's not supernatural horror, put it that way, but it's got elements of thrill in it.
Excellent,
fantastic. Sounds like you've got a lot on the go then at the moment.
Yeah. No, it's great. I mean, being busy is a lot better than not being busy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've done both.
Well, I mean, I think that's the sort of broad swathe of what we were going to ask about, but we like to finish off the podcast with a few quick-fire alternative questions. So you have to give us the first answer that pops into your head. And since it's you and since it's me asking this, I think I can get away with this. Pizza or pasta?
Pasta.
Okay.
But actually half and half.
Yeah.
You know,
that's a cheating answer. I'm afraid we can't accept.
But there's some restaurants do that. You can have half pizza and half pasta. Or else if I'm going out with my wife, one of us might order pizza and the other might order pasta and we might share it. But pizza and pasta very, very well together. Because pizza's not a meal on its own. Pizza's not a full meal. It's more than a snack, less than a meal. So it complements a plate of pasta.
No, I agree. I mean, I have ordered a pasta starter followed by a pizza before. Although my mum always disapproves of that if I attempt to do that.
But I hope that when you order your pasta starter, you say you can have pasta starter, but you make it a full portion.
Oh yeah, no, don't worry. Because
otherwise, what's the point?
Exactly.
See the portions. I mean, I don't want to get racist here, right? But Anglo-Saxon portions of pasta, that is what is left at the bottom of the pot that I scrape up just with an egg. That's not a meal. You see 500 grams of pasta and it says serves like 27 or something.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Since when? But anyway, pasta, not pizza.
Excellent.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
Excellent.
Didn't like Star Wars. Even when I first saw it, 1976 it came out, or 77. I was 13 or something. Mm-hmm. And I went with my pal to watch it, and afterwards I thought, what was all the fuss about? And I didn't like it then. I'm not like any of the other ones. Don't care.
Interesting.
Do not like them. Not enough saving of cats. You see, too many explosions up in space. Not enough cats being saved.
That's right.
Okay, makes
well,
sense.
no, yeah, Star Trek definitely has
a lot of cats. Yeah.
More characters. I'm not sure about the cats. Tribbles, maybe. Real book or ebook?
Ebook.
Okay.
Used to like real books, but I find that I like ebooks because you can make the print bigger. And as I'm now closer to 40 than I am 30. Well, I am, and I find that print in books, it's like they make it so small because they think it's cool to make it. I don't know why. Anyway, I don't like this. I like bigger prints. So with an ebook, you can make it bigger if you want.
TV or cinema?
TV.
Or is it?
Why would anybody go to the cinema anymore? Why would you go to the cinema? You pay 10 quid, they put you, as often as not, in a tiny wee box with people grunting and talking and eating all around you, and the screen isn't that much bigger than the screen at home. I mean, it used to be you went to the cinema, it was like a beautiful theatrical experience. They had curtains that opened, they had ushers and usherettes. It was a kind of luxurious sense of occasion. And now it's horrible. I miss good cinema experiences, but I've almost given up now.
Yeah, last one. Fancy restaurant or takeaway?
Ooh, I've got to choose, do I?
Yep.
Ooh. Oh, I like both. I'm going to go for a takeaway. Because you can lie on your couch and watch telly.
And have RuPaul.
Actually, it's not me that loves RuPaul, it's my daughter, but she kind of...
Sure.
Well, okay. I mean, right, I'm not gonna... It sounds like protesting too much. Yeah, no, just because you can, if there was a fancy restaurant with a screen and a couch that you could lie on while you ate, but until they have such a thing, then takeaway.
Well, I really enjoyed that chat with Sergio. It was really good catching up with him. He had some interesting anecdotes.
Yeah, just don't get him to do any internet searches for you.
Yeah, best keep him away from the internet by the sounds of things. I should also say that we looked up the BAFTA records and found out that he lost out to Emily Young for Kiss of Life for the BAFTA Best Newcomer in 2003. So, not to rub the salt into the wound there, Sergio, but that's who it was that beat you. Sergio also mentioned his wife, Helen, there. That's Helen Fitzgerald, who is the author of many books, including The Cry, which was recently adapted for the BBC. We're actually lucky enough to be speaking to Helen in a few weeks, so we're looking forward to that, and please do tune in for that one.
Next week we have Adrian Walker, author of End of the World Running Club, a book that we both read and really enjoyed. We spoke about it briefly a few episodes ago. He's on next week. It was a great chat with him, really interesting stuff. And in the meantime, if you want to get in touch, you can send us a tweet to @right_gear. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. And you can send us an email to podcast@rightgear.co.uk if you have any questions you'd like us to answer.
But don't send us any questions for upcoming authors because we've already recorded them. So it'll be a bit difficult for us to ask them. But in the meantime, just to say thanks to Simon Stokes, as always, for his production assistance. And we'll leave you now with a bit more info about the Page One Notebook, which, as we say, has now launched on Kickstarter. So please do check that out. See you next week.
See you later.